The rain fell in sheets that afternoon, as if the heavens themselves were mourning Calvin Monroe. 3 figures huddled under separate umbrellas on the front porch of a modest 2-story colonial, the house where they'd grown up, where holidays had been celebrated, where their mother had passed away 5 years earlier, and where their father had lived alone until his heart gave out 3 days ago. Lisa, the eldest, fumbled with her phone, scrolling through contacts. "I've called every locksmith in town. None of them will let us in without proof of ownership." Michael, the middle child, leaned against the railing. "This is ridiculous. We grew up here. Everyone in the neighborhood knows us." "It doesn't matter," Jennifer, the youngest, said quietly. "Legally, we can't prove we have any right to be here." The 3 siblings stood in uncomfortable silence, water pooling at their feet. The funeral reception had ended hours ago, relatives and friends returning to their lives, while the Monroe children remained locked out of their childhood home. The spare key that had always been hidden under the garden gnome was gone, likely moved by their father in his final security-conscious years. "Did either of you bring the will?" Lisa finally asked. "Dad's lawyer wasn't at the funeral." Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances. "What lawyer?" Michael asked. "The one handling Dad's estate," Lisa replied, her voice rising slightly. "The one who has the will." Jennifer's eyes widened. "Dad had a will?" "Of course he had a will," Lisa snapped, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "He promised us everything was taken care of. He said it 1,000 times. "He said a lot of things," Michael muttered. And in that moment, standing before the locked door of their father's house, their inheritance, their history, their shared childhood home, the 3 siblings began to realize that promises, no matter how well-intentioned, could not unlock doors. 5 years earlier, Calvin Monroe had sat at the head of his dining room table, surrounded by his 3 children and their spouses. It was the first Thanksgiving since Eleanor, his wife of 42 years, had passed away. The empty chair at the other end of the table stood as a silent reminder of her absence. "I've been doing some thinking," Calvin announced as he carved the turkey, his hands steady despite his 73 years. "About the future, about what happens after I'm gone." "Dad, please," Lisa interjected. "Not today." Calvin shook his head. "No, this is exactly the right time. Family should talk about these things openly." Jennifer reached for her wine glass. If Mom were here, she'd change the subject. "If Mom were here," Calvin replied with a sad smile, "she'd tell me to stop putting it off. So here it is. I want you all to know that everything is taken care of. The house, the accounts, everything." Michael set down his fork. "You've made a will?" "I've made arrangements," Calvin said vaguely. "The important thing is that you 3 will share everything equally. The house will go to all of you." "What about the cabin in Michigan?" Jennifer asked. "Mom always wanted me to have that." Calvin nodded. "And you will. Michael, you've always loved my woodworking tools. And Lisa, you'll get your mother's jewelry and the antiques. It's all going to be fair." Lisa's husband, Robert, leaned forward. "Calvin, if you don't mind my asking, have you actually formalized any of this? With an attorney?" Calvin waved dismissively. "I've looked into it. The paperwork is in progress. But you don't need to worry about the details. You all know what's right, and you'll split things fairly when the time comes." "Which won't be for many years," Lisa added quickly. Calvin smiled. "Of course not, but it's good to have these conversations, to be prepared." The conversation moved on to safer topics. Michael's son's college applications, Jennifer's new job, Lisa and Robert's upcoming anniversary trip. But throughout the meal, Robert exchanged concerned glances with his wife. As an accountant, he knew the difference between arrangements and legally binding documents. Later, as they cleared the table, Robert whispered to Lisa, "Your father hasn't actually created a will, has he?" Lisa stacked plates with more force than necessary. "He said he has it under control." "That's not the same thing." "He's my father," Lisa hissed. "If he says it's handled, it's handled." But it wasn't handled. Not that Thanksgiving, nor the following Christmas, when Calvin again assured his children that everything was sorted out. Not during the summer barbecue when he mentioned setting up trust funds for his grandchildren, or the following year when he suggested Lisa might want to move into the family home after he was gone. Calvin Monroe was a man of many promises and few signatures. A man who believed his word was as good as any legal document. A man who, like so many, assumed tomorrow would always come. The doctor called it an aortic dissection, a sudden tear in the wall of the major artery carrying blood from the heart. Calvin had been working in his garden on a Tuesday afternoon when the pain struck. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was unconscious. By the time his children reached the hospital, he was gone. The first few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, phone calls to distant relatives, and the peculiar suspended reality that follows an unexpected death. It wasn't until after the funeral, standing on that rain-soaked porch, that the practical consequences began to emerge. That night, the three siblings gathered at Lisa's house, spreading documents across her dining room table. The same table they'd inherited from their parents' first apartment. The one with the burn mark from when 5-year-old Michael had knocked over a candle. "I found these in my files," Lisa said, pushing forward a folder. "Copies of Dad's insurance policies from when Mom died. He was supposed to update the beneficiaries." Michael flipped through the papers. "These still list Mom as the primary beneficiary." "And the contingent beneficiaries?" Jennifer asked. "Also outdated. It's still those old trust accounts he set up when we were kids, the ones that dissolved 20 years ago." Jennifer sank into a chair. "What about bank accounts? Retirement funds?" Lisa shook her head. "I don't even know what banks he used after he consolidated everything." "He mentioned Fidelity," Michael offered. "At least I think it was Fidelity." "Great," Jennifer said bitterly. "That narrows it down to one of the largest financial institutions in America." The siblings spent hours combing through the few documents they had, making lists of what they knew and what they didn't. The don't know column grew alarmingly long. No will, no trust, no power of attorney. No list of accounts or passwords. No clear title to the Michigan cabin that had been in the family for generations, but had never been properly transferred after their grandparents died. "We need a lawyer," Lisa finally declared. "Someone who specializes in probate." "Probate?" Jennifer asked. "It's the legal process for settling an estate when someone dies," Lisa explained, "especially without a will." Michael ran his hands through his hair. "How long does that take?" "Months," Lisa said. "Maybe longer." "And how much will it cost?" Jennifer's voice had a sharp edge. Of the three, her financial situation was the most precarious. A recent divorce had left her with significant debt, and she'd been counting on her inheritance to provide some stability. "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "But we'll split the cost evenly, just like Dad would have wanted." It was the first time one of them had presumed to know what their father would have wanted. It wouldn't be the last. The probate attorney's office was furnished in dark wood and leather, with framed law degrees lining the walls. Kathleen Diaz had been practicing estate law for 30 years, and nothing about the Monroe siblings' situation surprised her. "Your father died intestate," she explained, "which means without a will. In these cases, state law determines who inherits what." "But he wanted us to inherit everything equally," Lisa insisted. "Fortunately, that aligns with state law," Diaz replied. "As his surviving children, you three are his heirs. However, transferring assets is considerably more complex without a will." "How complex?" Michael asked. The court will appoint an administrator to inventory assets, pay debts and taxes, and distribute what remains. This typically takes 6 to 9 months, sometimes longer. Jennifer leaned forward. But the house, we can't even get inside. Not without court approval, Diaz confirmed. Until the court appoints an administrator, no one has legal authority to access the property or accounts. What about his bills? Michael asked. The mortgage, utilities, property taxes. Those obligations continue, Diaz said. Someone will need to pay them to prevent foreclosure or service interruptions. Lisa's face tightened. So we have to pay to maintain a house we can't enter? I'm afraid so, unless you can demonstrate immediate access is necessary to preserve the estate's value. The siblings' faces grew increasingly strained as the attorney outlined the process ahead. Court filings, publication notices, inventories, appraisals, tax returns, debt settlements, each with its own timeline and cost. And your fees? Lisa finally asked. My retainer is $5,000. Additional hours will be billed at $350 per hour. Jennifer's sharp intake of breath was audible. That's just for our representation, Diaz continued. Court costs, appraisal fees, publication notices, those are additional. Michael stared out the window. And all of this could have been avoided if Dad had just signed a will. Diaz nodded. A basic estate plan would have cost a fraction of what you'll spend now. More importantly, it would have given you clear authority to handle his affairs immediately after his death. As they left the attorney's office, none of the siblings spoke. The magnitude of what lay ahead was settling over them like a heavy fog. Months of legal proceedings, thousands in unexpected costs, and a growing realization that their father's verbal promises held no legal weight. We should meet tomorrow, Lisa finally said as they reached the parking garage, to figure out how we're going to handle the immediate expenses. I can't tomorrow, Michael replied. I have to be in Chicago for work. This is more important than work, Lisa snapped. Not to my boss, Michael retorted. Some of us don't have the luxury of rearranging our schedules whenever we want. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Forget it. Jennifer watched the tension build between her siblings. I can meet whenever. I'm flexible right now. Lisa's expression softened slightly. Saturday morning then? My place? They agreed on the time and parted ways, each carrying away a slightly different version of the meeting, of their father's intentions, and of what fair would mean in the months ahead. Calvin Monroe had been dead for 3 weeks when the locksmith finally let the siblings into their childhood home. A court-appointed administrator had authorized temporary access to inventory the contents, but not to remove anything of value. The house smelled stale, the air still and undisturbed. Mail had piled up inside the door, and a plant in the kitchen window had withered from lack of water. In the living room, their father's reading glasses sat on an open book, a half-finished cup of tea nearby. It's like he just stepped out, Jennifer whispered. Lisa pulled out her phone. We need to document everything. The attorney said to take photos of each room before we touch anything. Michael wandered toward the stairs. I'll start upstairs in Dad's office. That's where he would have kept important papers. They spent the day methodically working through the house, opening drawers, cabinets, and closets. They found tax returns from 20 years ago, but nothing recent. They discovered a safety deposit box key, but no information about which bank held the box. They found their mother's engagement ring in a jewelry box, but no mention of who should inherit it. Look at this, Jennifer called from the den. She was holding a leather-bound notebook. Michael and Lisa joined her. Inside, in their father's precise handwriting, was a list of personal items with names beside them. Lisa, mother's pearl necklace and gold earrings. Michael, grandfather's pocket watch and cufflinks. Jennifer, mother's opal ring and silver bracelet. "This is it," Jennifer said, her voice trembling. "This is what he wanted us to have." Lisa took the notebook, flipping through the pages. "It's not signed or dated. It's just notes." "It's Dad's handwriting," Michael argued. "It's clear what he intended." "But it's not a legal document," Lisa insisted. "The attorney was very clear about that." Jennifer reached for the notebook. "I don't care about the legal technicalities. This is what Dad wanted." "It's not that simple," Lisa said, holding the notebook away from her sister. "What about the things that aren't listed here? What about the house itself, the financial accounts? We need to follow the legal process." "The legal process is draining what little inheritance we have," Michael said, his voice rising. "Every day we wait, more money goes to lawyers and court fees." "And what do you suggest?" Lisa demanded. "That we just start taking things? That's theft, Michael." "It's not theft if we're the rightful heirs. It is if the court hasn't authorized it." As the argument escalated, Jennifer suddenly grabbed the notebook from Lisa's hands. "Stop it, both of you. Is this what Dad would have wanted? Us fighting over his things before he's even cold in the ground?" The siblings fell silent, shame coloring their faces. But something had shifted. A line had been crossed. The trust that their father had assumed would guide them, the faith he had placed in their ability to do what's right, was already beginning to crack. 2 months after Calvin's death, the siblings met with Kathleen Diaz again. The probate process was moving forward, but new complications had arisen. "We've discovered a second mortgage on the house," Diaz explained. "Taken out 3 years ago." Lisa frowned. "For how much?" $120,000. Jennifer gasped. "But the house was almost paid off. Mom and Dad only had about $50,000 left on the original mortgage." "Where did the money go?" Michael asked. Diaz consulted her notes. "It appears most of it went to a series of cash withdrawals and transfers to an account we haven't been able to identify yet." The siblings exchanged confused glances. "Dad never mentioned a second mortgage," Lisa said, "or financial problems." "He was always so careful with money," Jennifer added. "This doesn't make sense." "Unfortunately, it's not uncommon," Diaz replied. "Many people, especially of your father's generation, are private about financial difficulties. They don't want to worry their children." "So, what does this mean for the estate?" Michael asked. "It significantly reduces the equity in the home," Diaz explained. "And since the house appears to be the largest asset, it reduces the overall value of the estate substantially." Lisa leaned forward. "How substantially?" "Based on our current assessment and the outstanding debts we've identified, including medical bills and credit card debt. After selling the house and settling all obligations, each of you might receive somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000. The number hung in the air like a bad odor. Their father's house, the family home, had been valued at over $600,000. They had each mentally calculated their share at around $200,000. Now they were looking at a quarter of that amount. "There's more," Diaz continued, her expression grave. "We've discovered some inconsistencies in your father's financial records from the past few years." "What kind of inconsistencies?" Lisa asked, her accountant husband's warnings echoing in her mind. "Large cash withdrawals, unusual transfers, and there's evidence he was sending money to someone on a regular basis." "Dad was supporting someone?" Michael's voice rose in disbelief. "Like a girlfriend?" "We don't know," Diaz admitted, "but these transactions began about 2 years after your mother passed away." Jennifer's face had gone pale. "How much money are we talking about?" "Based on what we've been able to track so far, approximately $95,000 over 3 years." The room fell silent as the siblings absorbed this information. Their father, prudent, responsible Calvin Monroe, had been living a financial life they knew nothing about. Had been, perhaps, living a personal life they knew nothing about. Lisa's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. She reached into her purse, pulled out a wrinkled envelope, and placed it on the attorney's desk. "I found this last week," she said quietly. It was in a book on Dad's nightstand. It was a Father's Day card, dated 3 years earlier. Inside, in Lisa's precise handwriting, "To the man who taught me the value of planning ahead. I'm so proud to be your daughter." Lisa's fingers trembled as she folded the card closed. "I was so sure he had everything under control, so sure I knew him." "We need to find out who this person is," Lisa finally said, her voice hard. "The court has authorized us to subpoena bank records," Diaz replied, "but it will take time." As they left the attorney's office, the siblings walked in silence to the parking garage. But this time, the silence wasn't shared. It was 3 separate silences, 3 minds racing along different tracks. "I can't believe he was supporting someone," Michael finally said as they reached their cars. "After everything he said about saving for our futures, about being responsible." "We don't know what the situation was," Jennifer said defensively. "Maybe he was helping a friend in need." "For 3 years?" Lisa scoffed. "To the tune of nearly $100,000? That's not helping a friend, that's supporting a dependent." "Or paying for companionship," Michael muttered. "Michael!" Jennifer exclaimed. "What? Dad was lonely after Mom died. We all saw it. We all moved on with our lives." Lisa's face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare suggest this is our fault. Dad chose to hide things from us. He chose to drain his savings instead of talking to his own children. And now we're paying the price," Michael said bitterly. "Literally." Jennifer looked between her siblings, the widening divide palpable. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Let's wait for the bank records." But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Their father, whom they thought they knew so well, had kept secrets, had made promises he couldn't keep. And in his silence, in his failure to formalize his wishes, he had left them not just with diminished inheritance, but with questions that might never be answered. By the 4th month after Calvin's death, the siblings were communicating primarily through their attorneys. The discovery of the second mortgage and the mysterious financial transactions had created a chasm of distrust that widened with each new revelation. In stark contrast to their current reality, a memory surfaced. Thanksgiving dinner 5 years earlier, when their mother was still alive. The dining room filled with laughter, Calvin carving the turkey with theatrical flourish, Eleanor playfully swatting his arm when he stole a bite, Michael's son demonstrating a magic trick that made Jennifer snort wine through her nose, Lisa and her husband slow dancing in the kitchen to Nat King Cole while the pies cooled. A family whole and happy, bound by something stronger than legal documents. Now, the only thing filling the Monroe house was silence. The warmth of those memories had faded like an old photograph, replaced by cold legal terminology and the echo of conference rooms. The bank records had finally arrived, revealing that Calvin had indeed been supporting someone. His brother-in-law, Eleanor's older brother James, who had been diagnosed with early-onset dementia shortly after Eleanor's death. James had no children, no spouse, and Calvin had quietly stepped in to help with medical bills, home care, and eventually, a quality nursing facility. "Dad should have told us," Lisa insisted during one of their increasingly rare face-to-face meetings. "We would have understood." "Would we?" Jennifer asked. "Or would we have seen it as money being taken from our inheritance?" "That's not fair," Michael interjected. "We're not monsters. Uncle James is family." "But Dad didn't trust us enough to tell us," Jennifer persisted. He kept it secret, just like he kept the second mortgage secret, just like he never finalized his will. Because he was ashamed, Lisa said. He'd always been the provider, the planner. He couldn't admit he was struggling. The revelation about Uncle James had answered some questions, but created new ones. Why hadn't Calvin updated his life insurance to cover these additional expenses? Why hadn't he created a trust for James instead of depleting his own resources? Why hadn't he simply talked to his children? The answers, if they existed, had died with Calvin. What remained was a tangle of legal complications, diminished assets, and 3 siblings whose relationship was fraying under the strain. The Michigan cabin, which Jennifer had always expected to inherit, had to be sold to cover estate taxes and outstanding debts. The antique furniture that Lisa had grown up admiring, pieces handed down through generations, went to auction. The woodworking tools that Michael had hoped to pass on to his own son were valued, inventoried, and added to the estate's assets. Even personal items, photos, letters, their mother's recipe box, became points of contention. Without clear instructions, every distribution decision required consensus, and consensus was becoming impossible to reach. Dad promised me Mum's recipes, Jennifer argued during one particularly heated exchange. He specifically said I should have them. He promised a lot of things, Lisa replied coldly. But he didn't put anything in writing. The court-appointed administrator, forced to mediate such disputes, often reminded them that without legal documentation, verbal promises held no weight. The law would determine who got what, not their father's casual assurances over Sunday dinners. And beneath these practical disputes ran a deeper current of betrayal, not just by their father, who had failed to formalize his wishes, but by each other. Old resentments surfaced. Childhood rivalries re-emerged. The sense of family unity that Calvin had taken for granted, that he had assumed would guide his children through the distribution of his estate, was evaporating like morning dew. "You were always Dad's favorite," Michael accused Lisa during an argument over their father's coin collection. "That's why you think you should get to decide everything. And you were always the irresponsible one," Lisa shot back. "That's why Dad never trusted you with the details of his finances." Jennifer, caught between her feuding siblings, retreated further into silence. Her financial situation, already precarious before their father's death, was growing desperate. The divorce settlement had left her with mounting credit card debt, and she'd been counting on her inheritance to provide a fresh start. Now, faced with diminished prospects and endless delays, she made a decision that would irreparably fracture the family. "I'm selling my share of the estate," she announced one day, after another fruitless meeting with the administrator, "to a company that specializes in probate advances." "Your what?" Lisa's voice was incredulous. "They buy inheritance rights," Jennifer explained. "They give you cash now in exchange for whatever you eventually inherit. I'll get $30,000 immediately, and they'll collect my share when the estate settles." "But that's highway robbery," Michael protested. "Your share will be worth more than that." "Maybe," Jennifer conceded, "if we ever get through this process, if there's anything left after all the legal fees and taxes, if the market doesn't crash before the house sells." "So you're selling out?" Lisa demanded. "Taking a lowball offer and walking away?" Jennifer's expression hardened. "I'm doing what I have to do. I can't wait anymore. I have bills to pay, a life to rebuild." "Dad would be so disappointed," Lisa said, her voice cold. "Dad's not here," Jennifer replied, "and that's the whole problem, isn't it? He left us with promises instead of plans, with words instead of actions. And now we're tearing each other apart over what's left." She walked out then, ignoring Lisa's calls to come back, ignoring Michael's attempts at mediation. The next day, she signed the paperwork with the probate advance company. Her siblings learned about it through their attorneys. It was the point of no return. The family that Calvin Monroe had built, had loved, had assumed would remain unified after his death, was now irreparably fractured. A year after Calvin's death, the probate process was finally complete. The house had sold for less than expected in a declining market. The outstanding debts, including the second mortgage, had consumed much of the equity. The legal fees, exacerbated by the siblings' inability to agree on virtually anything, had further depleted the estate. In the end, Lisa and Michael each received approximately $37,000. The probate advance company received Jennifer's share of $37,000 in exchange for the $30,000 they had advanced her months earlier. The non-financial cost was immeasurable. Jennifer no longer spoke to Lisa. Michael maintained a strained relationship with both sisters, but avoided family gatherings. The cousins, once close as siblings themselves, were caught in the middle, forced to navigate separate relationships with their feuding parents. Lisa's daughter would later get engaged, and Jennifer would not attend the wedding. Michael's son would graduate from college, and Lisa would send a card, but decline the invitation to the celebration. Family holidays became complicated logistics problems, rather than joyful reunions. The three siblings who had stood together on that rain-soaked porch, united in grief, were now estranged. Not because they had never loved each other, but because their father had failed to translate his love into legal action. Because he had assumed that verbal assurances would be enough. Because he had believed that tomorrow would always come, bringing with it another opportunity to get around to it. Calvin Monroe had been a good man, a loving father, a dedicated provider. He had worked hard, saved diligently, and wanted the best for his children. But his failure to formalize his wishes, to create a proper will, to establish clear beneficiaries, to document his intentions, had ultimately cost his family far more than money. It had cost them each other. The truth is, Calvin Monroe's story is far from unique. Every day, families across America face similar situations. Loved ones who die without proper estate planning, leaving behind not just grief, but legal complications, financial uncertainties, and the seeds of family conflict. The statistics are sobering. Despite understanding the importance of estate planning, approximately 67% of Americans still don't have a will. Among those who do have wills, many are outdated, incomplete, or improperly executed. And even fewer have comprehensive estate plans that include powers of attorney, healthcare directives, and clearly designated beneficiaries for all assets. Estate attorney Maria Vasquez, who has handled thousands of probate cases over her 30-year career, puts it bluntly: "The road to broken families is paved with good intentions and unsigned papers. I've seen it countless times," she continues. "People who truly love their families, who think they've made their wishes clear, but who never take that final step of legally documenting those wishes. They don't realize that verbal promises have no standing in probate court. They don't understand that without proper documentation, their assets become subject to state intestacy laws, regardless of what they intended. The consequences extend far beyond financial loss. The emotional damage, the resentment, the mistrust, the permanent rifts that can form between siblings or between generations, often proves irreparable. Money is just the catalyst," Vasquez explains. "What really tears families apart is the sense of betrayal, the feeling that a parent's love wasn't strong enough to motivate them to properly plan ahead. And then, of course, there's human nature. The way grief and financial stress can bring out the worst in people, can resurrect old jealousies and resentments that might otherwise have remained dormant. The solution is straightforward, if not always easy. Proper estate planning, done well before it's needed. This means not just creating a will, but reviewing and updating it regularly. It means ensuring that all financial accounts have correctly designated beneficiaries. It means creating powers of attorney for healthcare and finances. It means having difficult but necessary conversations with family members about your wishes and the steps you've taken to formalize them. Estate planning isn't really about death, Vasquez notes. It's about love. It's about taking concrete action to protect the people you care about most. It's about giving them the gift of clarity and peace of mind during what will already be an incredibly difficult time. Calvin Monroe thought he was protecting his children by not burdening them with details, by assuring them that everything was taken care of. In reality, the greatest gift he could have given them would have been proper documentation. Clear, legal, indisputable evidence of his wishes. Because in the end, love isn't just about what we feel or what we say. It's about what we do. And sometimes the most profound act of love is signing a document that ensures your family will remain whole after you're gone. Have you witnessed a family torn apart because of money and missed planning? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might save another family's future. And if you believe real love plans ahead, like this video and subscribe to Goldprint, because tomorrow doesn't wait.